When configuring multiple spanning tree protocol, you will have to specify a region name. So this region name is going to have to match between all of the different switches that are part of the same region. It identifies the region they belong to. In addition, you'll specify a revision number. The revision number is not a dynamically changing revision number. It's just so you can identify the current configuration revision of multiple spanning tree protocol. However, if you don't change it manually every time you make a change, it's just going to stay at that number. So whatever you pick has to match. If you ever change it, it's going to have to be changed on all the devices because it has to match amongst all the devices in the same region. And lastly, you need to identify the instance to VLAN mappings. So you'll specify the instances and then you'll map the VLANs to those instances with the instance command. You'll do all of this in a spanning tree MST configuration mode. And finally, if you want to manipulate who the root bridge is, because by default, the root bridge was not selected appropriately within your environment, you can change the root bridge on an instance by instance basis. And if we examine this configuration example, we can see here that our switch on the left-hand side has been configured with the spanning tree MST configuration command. It has been given a region name of XYZ, a revision number of 1, and VLANs 11, 21, and 31 have been mapped to instance 1. VLANs 12, 22, and 32 have been mapped to instance 2. And it has been configured as the primary root bridge for instance 1. So notice that with MST, you're mapping it on an instance by instance basis, not a VLAN by VLAN basis, the root bridge. So that's the configuration for our switch on the left-hand side. How would the configuration for the switch on the right-hand side look like? Well, it has to be identical to a certain extent. For example, it has to have the same name. It has to have the same revision number. It has to have the same instance to VLAN mappings. However, when it comes to the root bridge decision, this command is not necessary on the switch on the right-hand side because we already have our primary root bridge here. However, if we want this switch to be the root bridge for instance 2, then we type in spanning tree MST2 root primary. And then that switch would become the root bridge for MST instance 2. Now, what about this switch? What does it need? Well, let's say that's the access layer switch. Everything would have to be the same, except we wouldn't need to specify this root primary command at the bottom. So in reality, what are you typically going to do when deploying MST? You're going to configure it, and then copy and paste that configuration to all the switches that need it. And lastly, don't forget to turn on MST with our command we see at the top. Spanning tree mode MST. We'll then turn it on and implement this configuration. And I'm a big fan of doing the configuration first, setting it all up, and then going back and changing all the switches in the end to mode MST. Because if you set it first to mode MST, then it turns it on, and then you have your convergence that happens, and then you start creating these instances after the fact. So, keep it simple. Do all your configuration, get it set up, then convert it over to MST by using spanning tree mode MST.